This is the image that gave birth to an exhibition because it spoke volumes to an unlikely group of young people.
They were black, 10 young black men and 1 black young woman. And I showed them this picture and it went absolutely silent. And then it became electric and I was bombarded with questions. And I tried to answer these questions, but I was taken aback. What had happened with the youngsters was they had seen an image that they had never ever seen or even imagined before. Here were black Spitfire pilots. The iconic nature of the Spitfire pilots, those glamorous young men who defended this country and fought for freedom. They'd never imagined there'd be black people involved, but they were. It got very, very, very intense. And one young man looked me straight in the eye and he said, "Why haven't we heard this before?" It was a curious thing. When he looked at me, he wasn't happy. Why haven't I heard this? He wanted to know why he didn't know about this. 2 days later, we found out they were former gang members. Now, if it had hit former gang members that hard, clearly it had impact for other people as well.
The RAF Museum issued an appeal to gather more material on black personnel. People responded, raiding their family albums and donating mementos of their own service life.
And that's the one thing we were discovering right the way through, is that it was a far more positive story than we thought it would be. We thought we were going to have to keep saying, but you must understand in those days, in those days. We were discovering people who were saying that the Royal Air Force, decades before civil society, was treating people with absolute fairness. We weren't expecting this. They had very strong rules in place about racial discrimination and harassment. We didn't see until the 1970s in the workplace.
So how do you begin telling the story for visitors?
There have been exhibitions in the past that have looked at diversity in the armed forces. But we thought very often that they don't provide a context. They don't explain the story of how it is that African people were in the Caribbean and how they subsequently came to fight for the mother country. So the first thing we wanted to do was we wanted to take it right the way back to slavery. The experience of slavery forced black people to be strong and resourceful, and they knew the value of freedom and were willing to fight for it. After slavery was abolished, schools were set up in the Caribbean that were exceptionally good. So you've got people who are strong and resourceful, know the meaning of freedom, will fight for it, who also have high levels of literacy and numeracy, and these are the first volunteers for the British Flying Services. Sergeant William Robinson Clark from Kingston, Jamaica, was one of the Caribbean volunteers. He joined the Royal Flying Corps, paid his own passage to come, and he's one of those people who identified with the mother country, notwithstanding the relationship they'd had in the past, slavery and then colonial rule with all that that implied. He nevertheless felt he should come and fight for her in her hour of need, and that's exactly what he did. He joined the Royal Flying Corps. Initially, he was a driver with a balloon company on the Western Front, but he wanted to fly. And in 1917, he applied for pilot training and became the first black military pilot to fly for Britain.
Between the wars, the colour bar was reimposed. But when war came again, perhaps because they were radicals, or because they felt the duty in the colonies to stand with the mother country, or because they had a personal stake in fighting fascism and Nazism, African Caribbean men and women volunteered once more.
And are they welcomed into the British Armed Forces in 1939?
It takes a while. They begin recruiting after the colour bar is lifted in October 39, but the RAF doesn't start recruiting until November 1940 because of the losses in the Battle of France, the Battle of Britain. A lot of bomber aircrew are killed in this period as well. They need more people of high calibre. They need people who can do the job of flying the Spitfires and the Wellington bombers.
Again then, they're in this country, they're maybe part of the British Armed Forces, while the Americans have entered the war and are also stationed in Britain with a very different segregationist policy toward their black members.
This is certainly the case. It was a complicated time, and it was an eye-opener for a lot of Americans because they had been told, and they had seen that black people were different and they were to be treated differently, and here they would come and they would see handsome young black officers in RAF uniforms with white girlfriends, and that was quite an eye-opener.
So over there we have just such a picture, show me that, and tell me how rare this relationship might have been, do you think?
It is pretty unusual. We are looking at David Oguntoye, who had trained in Canada as a navigator. He met Sergeant Dulcie King from Kent, and they started walking out. Not everybody approved. At one point there was an attempt to beat him up, by fellow airmen, and she gave them a tongue lashing, told them where to get off. He was training to be a lawyer, and he was very, very clever. He would say to Darcy once they married, that's their wedding photograph, he would say, "My eyes are tired, will you read to me?" And she would read from the book, and bit by bit he brought her in, and he said, "You are going to be a lawyer." Not only did she become a lawyer, they both trained here, went to Nigeria, she became a High Court judge, and she is still with us, and she is great fun to talk to.
And in a sense, he gave her wings.
Absolutely. That's exactly what he did.
Well, it's a job to know where to start. There are so many of us doing so many different things.
So how is it that stories like this aren't better known? Like the teenagers who'd emerged from their gang, a sense of being kept in the dark was what Pierre Marsh felt the first time he stumbled across pictures of black pilots when he was researching black members of the fire service.
No story whatsoever about black Caribbean fighter pilots. And I think that's a bit of a tragedy. And one of the things I think a lot of the young third generation do not realise is they're part of that story, part of the story of defence of the realm against tyranny and hatred. And I think that is extremely important. Communities in the Caribbean actually paid for bomber squadrons. Why have we not heard of that? This is something that needs to be said, and it's something that needs to be recognised. And it's something that I think the black community needs to be proud of.
The curator's explanation is it's because the Brits didn't have the struggle the Americans did to overcome prejudice and inequality in service life that it wasn't noticed by the nation at large and largely hasn't been recorded for posterity.
In America, everyone knows and is proud of these particular airmen who battled against segregation and won and did a wonderful job. The problem is they had a battle and they fought it. Because there was no battle, because integration into British squadrons was smooth and successful, we don't know the story of our own black personnel.
After the Second World War, the volunteers had been changed by their experience and they returned to the Caribbean determined to effect change.
They were leaders. They carried with them the dynamic ethos of the RAF with its emphasis on fairness and team spirit and achievement. But they were also very special. They'd survived and they were going to do things. They weren't going to just sit down and let the grass grow under their feet. And they were going to change their homelands for the better, and that's exactly what they did.
And so here we see that they have spearheaded decolonisation.
Absolutely. Again, another thing we were not expecting is the number of ex-RAF personnel who are prominent in the anti-colonial movement.
How did Britain feel about that, though?
It's an interesting thing. I think it's fair to say that the RAF was not expecting that RAF veterans would be systematically dismantling the British Empire after the war. Nevertheless, when you've got people like Ulrich Cross and Johnny Smythe, it's not that worrying. You can
entrust the country to independent men of this stature.
When you've got men of this stature, exactly right.
They'd paved the way, and as Britain's black population increased over coming decades, many chose a service career.
Well, I grew up in Birmingham, and I had no family history at all in the military. It was just one of those longing to be in the armed forces. This was 1969, September 1969. It was very different then. It was very much a bigger Air Force. And there were quite a few Afro-Caribbean people in the Royal Air Force, and there's a lot more than now. The reception was very varied. Some places you go, you were well received, other places you weren't so well received. But, you know, we just joined in the rigours of being in the armed forces, and it was fantastic.
Donald rose to the rank of warrant officer, but he did find there were closed avenues in his career. He couldn't join the ceremonial Queen's Colour Squadron because of his colour. At other times, he was given more prominence.
I would be pushed to the front to tick a box, you know, because I needed to be representative and I needed to be seen, or the people around me needed to be seen to be representative. And it was very obvious I was ticking a box.
Did you resent that?
I resented it to a point. I suppose the answer is yes and no. If I'm ticking a box and that box is going the right, and that reason is going the right direction, then I know that people from behind me won't have to tick that box. They'll be there as a matter of right.
Dawn's still involved, filling an educational void. Just recently, an elderly lady expressed surprise that black people had medals. There's still work to be done. This airwoman received some attention when she joined up 15 years ago.
A few people have never really met a black person and been that close to them. So to an extent they were fascinated to know just a bit more about black people and just to get that little bit closer to them, to see, to just like feel their skin. You know, it sounds strange, but yes.
Sony says she's never experienced racism or sexism. She's embraced Air Force opportunity, travel and sport. For this display, she's given the Bible that gave her strength in Afghanistan.
That came in handy to help me through a few mental issues that I had, you know, just to give me that security when at times things were down and you didn't hear from your family and things like that. The Bible was there to help me. And I must say, it's nice I'm in the museum and I'm not dead.
So what is it that you want this exhibition to achieve?
We want to tell a story that has been neglected. It's a great story. It's a story that's inspirational. For so long, the history of the Royal Air Force was a closed-off area for black people. It had nothing to do with them. And now suddenly it is. We see black faces. We see large numbers of black faces, and we still do. We're still seeing people serving now who are proud to be in the Royal Air Force and to achieve things.
Have you invited back the black gang?
That is the next thing we have to do, because unfortunately they've proved elusive. We've tried to find them, but we will find them and we will get them and we'll ask them what they think. I had no idea who they were. All I knew was there was a group of people who were totally energized, who asked intelligent questions and demanded answers. I didn't know who they were. I like to think I still would have gone down anyway.
The exhibition picture's not complete yet. An online archive is open to ongoing contributions. And the Pilots of the Caribbean displays on show at the RAF Museum at cost free.